Hello, folks. This is Jon Brewton, the founder and CEO of Data Squared. Today, I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of our well review solution space, including our scenario modeling build out for the current UI. Now, the executables associated with the scenario modeling tool are not live and active right now, but what I will do is walk you through a couple of key things here. One, what is the sort of comprehensive data universe for produced water management? What's encompassed within that universe, specifically the structured, semi-structured, unstructured content across the different departments, across the different functions that really shore up our understanding of that value chain. Second, I'll talk really specifically about our AI implementation methodology, particularly our approach to data curation, data loading, how we structure the information, how we embed that information, how we embed it with semantic tags that give us the ability to meet a couple of key industry standards that are coming out that are both associated to the government space, whether that's the NIST AI 600 framework, or in the commercial space, the consortium organization, the Data and Trust Alliance, and their data provenance standards. And then third, I'll talk about how we really operate within the structure of this environment, and more specifically, how we use temporal and geographical components and constructs within the structure of our scenario modeling tool that enable us to really precisely target data for tactical extraction for the purpose of running these really distinct scenario models. So I'll jump right into it. What you're looking at right now on the screen is the well review interface. Now, right now, this is populated with a mix of structured, unstructured, semi-structured information. It's both private information associated to wells in the Permian Basin, and it's also associated to external open source information that we use to supplement or fill in some of the gaps that we have. Now, I'm just going to start with an example from a question and answer perspective. Tell me how to optimize my disposal activities while reducing my cost and increasing my opportunities for additional profit. Now, if you know anything about oil and gas, you know that that's a very nuanced question. To understand how to answer that question effectively and to get to the right answer, you really need to account for what is a multitude of functional representation. You need your production department, you need your reservoir department, you need your operations department, you need your drilling department, you need your planning department. You really need to understand from a regulatory perspective how everything is situated, what your capabilities are within the structure of these wells environments, and ultimately how you can toggle those environments along some of the commercial terms that you have in place to maximize your opportunity to reduce cost and really bolster your profitability in these areas. So it's a really nuanced question. And from a natural language perspective, we built a system around a data environment that allows us to really, from a contextual perspective, identify how these things are connected and why they actually make sense within the structure of the question that was asked to be pulled into this and to be used in the answers that are provided. So right now you're looking at, a fairly nuanced question, a fairly straightforward summarized answer, but this is really sort of the right way to think about that. You need to understand your permitted volume utilization, your optimized skim oil recovery opportunities, your managed expense per barrel, what the regulatory compliance is for each one of these wells. And you need to start looking at where you have opportunities within the structure of that context. And so the system does a really good job at a high level of being a strategic thought partner. If I was a new production superintendent stepping into this and somebody said I needed to reduce cost, I'd ask a question like that. And the system really allows you to get to the crux of the information very quickly. Now, a couple of differentiators about reView as a platform. In every one of the solutions that we pull together, we cite and source every aspect of the answers that are provided down to the data record level. And so as an example, in the answers that are produced in a natural language interface, you get to see these nodal references. Now, in general, we check everything for a hallucinated basis because of the structure and the proprietary nature of what we execute. We know what we passed the system. We know what was leveraged by the system. We know how it was leveraged to generate the answers that are produced. And we understand the value contribution of each one of those data elements in the structure of the answers that are provided. But for us, it's really important to, and this is sort of a sloppy summary view, be able to source everything and cite everything down to the data record level. So what you see here is a nodal reference that gives us an idea of evidence that's being pulled from SWD scorecards. And each one of the components associated to those scorecards in that information repository is being leveraged to generate an answer. Any supplemental open source information that's being pulled in to actually generate an answer, and ultimately the full scope of that data environment that's being leveraged to provide that answer that we showed you above. Now, that's a very short form way of saying, hey, natural language question and answer, it makes it easy on you. But how do we do this stuff? Well, there's a couple of key things that are really interesting in the system. One, this is a set of 1,862 wells. It has 400 columns of data across this information. There's like 775,000 data components in just this table. And in each one of these tables, we have similar scope and size. And so we're talking about really millions of data points. But one of the key features that we built into the system was the ability to go in and say very quickly, hey, what's going on with this well? And we do some pretty advanced perspective modeling where we start to look at these things within the structure of how a drilling engineer would look at something. And we start to see the information that's provided as a byproduct of that. We know the operator, the location, the well type. We understand whether it's active or not, when it was spudded, the completion date, the well geometry, the completion details, what's been produced so far, what was the peak, what's the cumulative, what's the sort of engineering aspects of this well that we would like to look at. And we can really toggle that in between any of these accounts. Now, this is just a fun way to get a quick summary of how any one component or any one asset within the structure of this data environment is connected to anything else and connected to how an individual within your organization would look at it. We can do the same thing from an accounting perspective and we'll get different results. You'll see this spin up. And now we're getting some of the same summary statistics, but now it's being repackaged in a sort of a different way. Now we're saying, like, what were the investment indicators? How did we complete this well? What's the previous performance? What's the EUR left in place? What are the efficiency metrics? What are the financial considerations? And how an accountant should sort of look at this information environment. So again, that's the same well. So we're just leveraging the same information in a different way to model a perspective that's associated to the person or the user that's engaging with this data. Now, we can do that across every aspect of this. It doesn't matter if we go into the well operations assistant, we can start to look at these from an accounting perspective or a field superintendent or production engineering perspective, and so on and so forth. I think the biggest thing to really wrap your head around is within this data environment, there's millions and millions of data points associated to produced water management in general and the value chain for produced water management. But really, we start to look at this sort of in silos of information. We have the well performance information, we have the operated assets information, we have the scorecards for how we've operated the midstream assets very specifically. We incorporate the drilling schedule so we know what's coming up, what's been executed, if they're AFE'd, when they were executed. Our produced water management forecast, which pairs well with actually the reservoir decline curves and all the decline curve analysis associated to these assets. How well we've done in the past putting away water, what the permitted base sort of looks like in these spaces, what our costs are. You're not going to see any of these agreements because these are proprietary to Civitas, but we can also start to incorporate things like, existing infrastructure for pipeline networks and how they're connected. And, this is really feeding into a broader part of the scenario modeling exercise where we say, hey, look, we want to understand how close any one thing is to another. If we can determine that, then we can understand how we could set up trucking routes and what that means for our capacity to actually start to build in some scenario modeling functionality. So I'll quickly jump over to what is like a data loader and what our philosophy is for data curation. And I think more importantly, what we want to do from really just an evidence perspective, like how do we curate these environments? So for us, it's all about really having targeted understanding of the information that we're going to try to upload and really tagging it effectively, from a sourcing perspective, from a provenance perspective, understanding the original system of record interface, our APIs into that space, how we pulled it, when we pulled it, and what the actual data sort of fidelity is. We can use classification levels. We can segregate these on operators. Like there's an ability to start to toggle this network and really sort of embed and semantically sort of enrich these environments along those lines. We also do things on upload, really looking at sort of like the temporal and geo graphic of sort of elements of each one of these data points so that we can understand how it's related to sort of this broader picture. And that gives us an understanding about sort of time horizons associated to new data and how we sort of store and embed and structure that information. So that's kind of how we go from start to something. Once we get to something, we get to this well review environment where we've curated this environment, we understand this wells environment, but then we get to how do we operationalize this environment more effectively? And so this is a great example of us really trying, I think, at the end of the day, to enable some point and click functionality. We should be able to draw a circle around, some aspect of it. Let's just use the San Joaquin Valley area as an example in Taft. And once we've selected that, we should be able to go in and say, for this scenario, we'd really like to include, information associated to this query from this date to this date. So now we start temporarily refining the overall structure of what we want to do from a scenario modeling run. This is for this particular exercise, we're going to pick these as our target wells because they're structurally aligned or near to the assets that we'd like to model around. And then we'd like to really determine, in our best capabilities, how much does it cost to actually service this environment? What are the operated cost elements associated to it? What are our monthly rentals? How much does it cost to actually put new pipeline in place or build frac ponds? What does that mean for our storage capacity and how we'd like to run scenarios in this environment to optimize our cost profile, reduce our total cost exposure, and increase our overall profitability? Once we get there, we can actually start to run these scenarios. Then we start to get these results. And right now we're building in a narrative interface where we can actually start to get summary information associated to this. And it gives us a very clear understanding of how to interpret those answers, what it means for our value proposition, and then ultimately the logistics plan, what information we're going to pass to which people in the field, how we're going to disseminate those orders, and what it means for how we execute work as a byproduct of it. So that's a quick walkthrough on the oil and gas interface. I'm going to provide some slides that'll supplement these pretty tangibly, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and thanks for your time today.